Bullies drag poor girl by hair. She exploded and broke their pride. Wren Blackwater moved through the halls of Riverside Community College like a shadow, her worn canvas sneakers silent against the polished floors. Her dark hair hung in front of her face like a curtain, hiding eyes that had seen too much for someone attending college. The oversized thrift store sweater draped over her thin frame, and the frayed edges of her jeans told a story of financial struggle that she never spoke aloud. 3 weeks into the semester, Wren had perfected the art of invisibility. She sat in the back corners of lecture halls, ate lunch alone on a bench behind the library, and avoided eye contact with everyone. The scholarship that brought her here was her ticket to a better life, but first she had to survive this place. Well, what do we have here? The voice belonged to Brixton Walsh, a towering figure with perfectly styled blonde hair and clothes that cost more than Wren's monthly food budget. He stepped directly into her path near the student center, flanked by his usual crew, Jace Morrison, whose cruel smirk never seemed to leave his face, and Tessa Lynn, whose designer everything screamed privilege and entitlement. Wren tried to step around them, but Brixton moved to block her again. "I'm talking to you, Charity Case." His voice carried across the courtyard, drawing amused looks from other students who quickly averted their gazes when they realized what was happening. "Please, I just need to get to class," Wren whispered, clutching her second-hand backpack closer to her chest. Jace laughed, a harsh sound that made other students nearby uncomfortable. "Did you hear that? She said please, like she's begging already." Tessa circled around behind Wren, examining her like a specimen. "Those shoes have holes in them, gross. Don't you have any self-respect?" The words stung, but Wren kept her eyes downcast. These people didn't know that every night she practiced forms her father had taught her before cancer took him away. They didn't know about the years of Krav Maga, kickboxing, and traditional martial arts that lived in her muscle memory. They couldn't see the discipline that kept her centered when everything else in her life felt chaotic. "I have to go," she said quietly, trying once more to move past them. This time, Brixton let her go, but not without a parting shot. "Run along, little mouse. Try not to trip over those pathetic shoes." The laughter followed her all the way to the psychology building, where she slipped into Professor Martinez's class just as it began. She took her usual seat in the back corner, next to the window where she could watch the oak trees sway in the breeze and pretend she was somewhere else. "Today we're discussing group dynamics and social hierarchies," Professor Martinez announced. "Can anyone give me an example of how power structures form in everyday environments?" Several hands shot up, but Wren kept hers firmly planted on her desk. She already understood power structures better than most people in this room ever would. After class, she hurried toward the library, hoping to find refuge in the quiet stacks. But as she rounded the corner near the campus bookstore, she heard familiar laughter. Brixton and his crew were lounging on the steps like predators waiting for prey. "There she is," Tessa pointed with a manicured finger. "Hey, discount store!" Wren tried to change direction, but Jace had already spotted her. "Where are you going so fast? Don't you want to hang out with us?" They followed her across the courtyard, their voices getting louder and more mocking. Other students looked up from their conversations, their textbooks, their phones, but no one intervened. They never did. "I bet she can't even afford the meal plan," Brixton said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "That's why she's so skinny, probably eating ramen for every meal." The cruel accuracy of his words hit harder than Wren expected. She quickened her pace toward the library entrance, but Jace jogged ahead and held the door shut just as she reached for it. "Not so fast," he grinned. "We're not done talking to you." Wren's hands trembled, but not from fear. The trembling came from restraint, from the massive effort it took to keep her training locked away. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. Never use these skills unless you have no other choice, little warrior. The moment you fight, everything changes forever." "What do you want?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "We want you to understand your place here," Brixton said, stepping closer. "This isn't a charity. People like us work hard to be here. People like you, well, you're just taking up space that belongs to someone more deserving." The words were designed to wound, and they did their job. But beneath the pain, something else stirred in Ren's chest, something dangerous and patient and perfectly controlled. She nodded once and walked away, leaving them laughing behind her. But she didn't go to the library. Instead, she went home to the tiny studio apartment she could barely afford and spent the evening moving through forms her father had taught her, each movement precise and flowing like water finding its way downhill. The harassment continued for weeks. They would accidentally bump into her in the cafeteria, sending her tray crashing to the floor. They would make loud comments about her appearance when she walked by. Tessa once loudly asked if anyone else could smell eau de thrift store when Ren entered their shared economics class. Through it all, Ren remained silent and kept her secret locked away. She focused on her studies, earned perfect scores on every exam, and tried to make herself even more invisible. But invisibility, she was learning, was sometimes just another word for being an easy target. Everything changed on a Thursday afternoon in October. Ren was sitting on her usual bench behind the library, eating a peanut butter sandwich and reviewing notes for her literature midterm, when she noticed someone approaching. It was Dylan Reeves, a guy from her American history class who had kind eyes and always said hello when he saw her. He was one of the few people on campus who treated her like a human being rather than an inconvenience. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, gesturing to the empty space beside her. Ren shook her head, scooting over to make room. Dylan was different from most students here. He worked nights at a local diner to pay for school, drove a beat-up Honda that was older than both of them, and never seemed to judge anyone for their circumstances. "Studying for Martinez's test?" he asked, glancing at her notes. "Yeah," Ren replied, surprised by how easy it felt to talk to him. "His essay questions always seem impossible until you really think about them." Dylan smiled. "You're probably the smartest person in that class. I see how you write down everything, and you always know the answers even when you don't raise your hand." A warmth spread through Ren's chest that had nothing to do with the autumn sunshine. For the first time in weeks, she felt like maybe this place wasn't completely hostile territory. They talked for another 20 minutes about history, about books, about dreams for the future. Dylan told her about his plans to become a teacher, and Ren found herself sharing her hope to become a social worker, to help people who felt as powerless as she did. "You'd be amazing at that," Dylan said sincerely. "You have this way of really listening to people. It's rare." As they walked back toward the main campus together, Ren felt something she hadn't experienced since arriving here. Hope. That feeling lasted exactly 15 minutes. Brixton appeared as if summoned by some cruel cosmic force, materializing near the student center with his usual entourage. His eyes narrowed when he saw Ren walking beside Dylan, and something ugly twisted across his features. "Well, well," he called out, his voice carrying that familiar tone of manufactured superiority. "Looks like our little charity case found herself a boyfriend." Dylan stopped walking, his shoulders tensing. "Just ignore them," Ren whispered, but she could already see the situation spiraling beyond her control. "Dylan, my man," Brixton continued, approaching with predatory casualness. "You know you can do better than that, right? I mean, look at her." He gestured dismissively at Ren's appearance. "What's next? Taking the homeless lady from downtown to homecoming?" Jace and Tessa laughed on cue, and other students began to gather, drawn by the promise of drama. Wren felt the familiar heat of humiliation rising in her cheeks, but this time it was different. This time, Dylan was involved. "Back off, Brixton," Dylan said firmly. "She hasn't done anything to you." "Oh, but she has," Brixton replied, his smile turning cold. "She's lowering the standards of this entire institution, making the rest of us look bad by association." Wren tugged at Dylan's sleeve. "Please, let's just go." But Brixton wasn't finished. He stepped closer to Dylan, using his height advantage to intimidate. "I'm trying to help you out here, buddy. Your reputation matters. Being seen with this, it reflects poorly on your judgment." "My judgment is fine," Dylan replied, but Wren could hear the uncertainty creeping into his voice. Tessa moved to Wren's other side, like a predator cutting off escape routes. "I bet she doesn't even shower regularly, living in whatever hovel she calls home." The crowd was growing larger, phones appearing as students sensed something entertaining was about to happen. Wren felt trapped, exposed like an animal in a zoo being gawked at by visitors. "You know what your problem is?" Brixton said to Wren directly, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "You think you belong here. You think you can just blend in and pretend you're like everyone else, but you're not. You're a fraud." Wren's hands clenched into fists at her sides, but she forced herself to breathe. Not yet. Not here. Too many witnesses. Too much at stake. Her scholarship, her future, everything depended on her staying invisible. "I think we're done here," Dylan said, taking Wren's arm. But as they turned to leave, Tessa's voice cut through the crowd noise like a blade. "Did you see her flinch? She's actually scared. This is too easy." Brixton stepped directly in front of Dylan. "Hold up there, hero. I think your girlfriend owes us an apology." "An apology for what?" Dylan demanded. "For existing," Jace answered, and the crowd laughed. Wren felt something crack inside her chest, but she forced herself to look up at Brixton. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "Louder," Brixton commanded, "so everyone can hear." "I'm sorry," Wren repeated, her voice carrying across the courtyard. "For what?" Tessa pressed. Wren closed her eyes briefly, feeling her father's training humming beneath her skin like electricity. "For existing." The crowd erupted in laughter and excited chatter. Phones were definitely recording now. By tonight, this would be spreading across every social media platform on campus. Brixton smiled with satisfaction. "See how easy that was? Now run along before we decide to make this really interesting." As they walked away, Wren heard Dylan whisper, "I'm sorry that happened. They had no right to treat you like that." But when she looked at him, she could see something had changed. He was looking at her differently now, not with disgust, but with a kind of uncomfortable pity that somehow felt worse. The magic of their earlier conversation was gone, replaced by the stark reality of what he'd just witnessed. That night, Wren lay on her narrow mattress and stared at the water stains on the ceiling of her studio apartment. Her phone buzzed occasionally with notifications she didn't bother to check. She knew what they would be, videos of her humiliation, shared and reshared with mocking commentary. For 3 more days, the harassment intensified. Students who had never noticed her before now pointed and whispered when she passed. Someone had put pictures from the incident on an anonymous social media account with captions like, "Scholarship student says sorry for existing," and "When you don't belong but can't leave." Wren endured it all with silent determination, but inside, something was building pressure like a dam about to break. The breaking point came on Monday morning. Wren arrived early to claim a table in the student center where she could eat her homemade sandwich and review notes before class. She was deep in her reading when she heard Dylan's voice nearby. "Hey, Wren." He slid into the seat across from her, looking genuinely concerned. "How are you holding up?" For a moment, the kindness in his eyes made her forget about everything else. "I'm okay," she said softly. "Thank you for asking." I've been thinking about what happened last week, Dylan continued. Those guys are jerks, but you shouldn't have to apologize for anything. You belong here just as much as anyone else. Something warm bloomed in Wren's chest. Maybe she'd been wrong about the change she'd seen in him. Maybe he really did understand. I brought you something, Dylan said, reaching into his backpack. He pulled out a thermos. It's hot chocolate. I thought you might like some. Wren felt tears prick at her eyes. When was the last time someone had done something kind for her? That's really sweet. Thank you. As she reached for the thermos, Dylan's smile was so genuine that Wren felt something shift inside her chest. Not the dangerous pressure she'd been holding back, but something gentler and more frightening in its own way. That's when Brixton's voice cut through her moment of happiness like a knife through silk. How touching, he said, his tone dripping with manufactured sympathy. The poor girl found herself a white knight. Wren's blood turned to ice as she realized Brixton and his crew were approaching their table. Other students in the area looked up from their conversations, sensing drama brewing. Seriously, Dylan, Tessa said, shaking her head in mock disappointment. This is just sad. You're like a lost puppy following her around. Leave us alone, Dylan said firmly, but Wren could hear the edge of uncertainty in his voice. Jace laughed. Us? There's an us now. That's adorable. Brixton pulled out the chair next to Wren and sat down uninvited, his presence immediately making the space feel smaller and more threatening. I've been thinking about our conversation last week, he said to Wren directly, and I realized I was too easy on you. Wren's heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her expression neutral. Around them, other students were starting to notice the confrontation, conversations dying down as people turned to watch. The thing is, Brixton continued, his voice carrying just loud enough for nearby tables to hear, I don't think you really understood the lesson. So today, we're going to try a different approach. Just ignore them, Dylan whispered to Wren, but his voice lacked conviction. Tessa moved to stand behind Wren's chair, effectively trapping her in place. The lesson is simple, she explained to the gathering crowd. Some people belong and some people don't. Some people earn their place and others take handouts. Which one are you, Wren? Jace asked mockingly, pronouncing her name like it was something distasteful on his tongue. Wren could feel the attention of dozens of students now, all watching and waiting to see what would happen next. Her father's voice whispered in her memory, Control is everything, little warrior. The person who loses control first loses everything. I don't want any trouble, she said quietly. But trouble found you anyway, Brixton replied. He reached across the table and flicked the lid off her thermos, sending hot chocolate splashing across her notes and textbooks. Oops, clumsy me. Dylan half stood from his chair. What the hell, Brixton? Sit down, hero, Jace said, putting a hand on Dylan's shoulder and pushing him back into his seat. This doesn't concern you. Wren stared at her ruined notes, the brown liquid seeping into pages of careful handwriting that represented hours of work. Her psychology textbook was soaked, the pages already beginning to warp. She couldn't afford to replace it. Clean it up, Tessa commanded. Use your sleeve. It's not like that sweater could look any worse. The crowd had grown larger now, forming a loose circle around their table. Some students looked uncomfortable, but none of them moved to help or intervene. They just watched, like spectators at a blood sport. Wren began carefully gathering her wet notes, trying to salvage what she could. Her movements were slow and precise, each breath calculated to maintain the control that was slipping away from her like water through cupped hands. Look how obedient she is, Brixton observed to his audience, like a trained animal. Dylan started to stand again, but this time Tessa was ready for him. I wouldn't do that if I were you, she said sweetly, unless you want to be next on our list. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Dylan's face flushed with anger and shame, but he remained seated. Ren didn't blame him. These people had power here, connections, influence. They could make life difficult for anyone who crossed them. Brixton watched Ren clean up the mess for a moment longer, then seemed to grow bored with the show. "This has been fun," he announced, "but I think we need to make the lesson more memorable." Before Ren could react, his hand shot out and grabbed a fistful of her dark hair, yanking her head back violently. Gasps echoed from the crowd as her chair tipped backward, sending her sprawling onto the floor with Brixton still gripping her hair. "The lesson is this," he said, his voice calm and educational, as if he were teaching a class. "Know your place." Pain shot through Ren's scalp as he pulled harder, forcing her to look up at the circle of faces surrounding them. Some students looked shocked, others excited by the drama. A few were definitely recording. Dylan jumped to his feet this time, but Jace was ready for him. "I said sit down," he growled, shoving Dylan hard enough to send him stumbling backward into another table. "Help me teach her," Brixton called out to the crowd. "What should charity cases do when they're taking up space that belongs to their betters?" "Apologize," someone called out, caught up in the mob mentality. "Louder," another voice added. Tessa clapped her hands together in delight. "This is perfect, a lesson in social hierarchy that everyone can appreciate." Brixton gave Ren's hair another vicious yank. "You heard them. Apologize for taking up space." The pain was sharp and immediate, but it was nothing compared to what Ren had endured in training. Her father had taught her to find calm in the center of chaos, to locate stillness in the heart of violence. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice steady despite everything. "For what?" "For taking up space." And Ren could feel something fundamental shifting inside her, like tectonic plates moving before an earthquake. The control she'd maintained for weeks was developing hairline cracks. "For existing," she whispered. Brixton's grin was triumphant. "See how easy that was? I think she's finally learning." But as he prepared to release her hair and claim victory, Dylan did something unexpected. Despite the risk to himself, despite Jace's threats, he stepped forward. "Let her go," he said, his voice stronger now. "This has gone far enough." The simple act of someone standing up for her when she couldn't stand up for herself was like a key turning in a lock Ren had kept secured for months. Her father's voice whispered again, but different words this time. "Sometimes, little warrior, having no choice is the only choice that matters." Brixton looked up at Dylan with genuine surprise. "I thought we established that this wasn't your business." "You're wrong," Dylan replied. "Someone being hurt is always my business." Jace moved to intercept Dylan again, but this time Ren was ready. As Brixton's attention shifted to deal with her defender, she made her choice. The movement was so fast that most of the crowd missed it. One moment she was on the ground with Brixton's hand twisted in her hair, and the next moment she was standing and his wrist was locked in a grip that made him gasp in pain. "Let go!" he demanded, trying to pull away. Ren applied just enough pressure to the nerve cluster in his wrist to make his hand release her hair involuntarily. "You first," she said quietly. The crowd went silent. Brixton's eyes widened as he realized that this small, quiet girl who had been his victim for weeks was now controlling him with casual efficiency. "What the hell?" Jace started forward, but froze when Ren shifted her grip slightly, causing Brixton to cry out in genuine pain. "Everyone stay where you are," Ren said, her voice calm and clear for the first time since arriving at this school. "We're going to have a conversation." Tessa backed away instinctively. "Brixton, do something!" "I can't move," he gasped, sweat beading on his forehead. "She's going to break my wrist." Ren looked around the circle of faces, seeing them really look at her for the first time. Not through her, not around her, but at her. "For weeks, you've all watched this happen. You've seen him humiliate me, hurt me, treat me like I was less than human, and you did nothing." She shifted her grip again, and Brixton whimpered. "You filmed it. You shared it. You laughed. You turned my pain into your entertainment." Dylan was staring at her in amazement. "Ren, how are you?" "My father taught me," she said simply. "Before he died, he taught me that strength isn't about hurting people. It's about protecting yourself and others when no one else will." Jace took a step forward. "You're crazy. Let him go right now. Or what?" Ren asked, her dark eyes meeting his for the first time. "You'll call security? You'll get me in trouble? You'll hurt me?" She laughed, and the sound was nothing like the frightened whispers they were used to hearing from her. "You've been hurting me for weeks. What could you possibly do to me now that would be worse?" The truth of her words hit the crowd like a physical blow. They had been complicit in this, and now they were seeing the consequences of their inaction. Brixton tried to twist free again, but Ren's grip was absolutely secure. Years of training with someone who had competed at national levels had given her skills that seemed impossible for someone her size. "Here's what's going to happen," she announced to the gathered crowd. "Brixton is going to apologize. Not just to me, but to every person he's hurt or humiliated. And then he's going to explain to everyone here why he thought it was acceptable to treat another human being the way he's treated me." "I'm not apologizing to you," Brixton snarled through gritted teeth. Ren adjusted her grip with surgical precision, and Brixton's knees buckled. "That wasn't a request." Tessa looked around desperately. "Someone help him. She's attacking him." "Really?" Ren asked mildly. "Because from where I'm standing, I'm a victim defending herself against someone who just assaulted me in front of 50 witnesses, who grabbed my hair and threw me to the ground while his friends threatened anyone who tried to help me." The crowd shifted uncomfortably as they realized she was absolutely right. On every phone camera that was recording, they had clear evidence of Brixton attacking first. "Dylan," Ren said without looking away from Brixton, "are you hurt?" "No," Dylan replied, his voice filled with wonder. "I'm fine." "Good. Because I'd hate to have to explain to security why the person who assaulted you needs medical attention." Jace and Tessa exchanged glances, suddenly understanding that their leader was completely outmatched. The girl they'd been tormenting for weeks wasn't just fighting back, she was winning. "Okay," Brixton gasped finally. "Okay, I'll apologize." "Loudly," Ren specified, "so everyone can hear." Brixton's face was red with pain and humiliation, but he raised his voice. "I'm sorry for the way I treated you." "More specific," Ren instructed, her grip never wavering. "I'm sorry for grabbing your hair and throwing you down. I'm sorry for humiliating you in front of everyone." "And?" Brixton looked around at the crowd, his eyes wild with desperate anger. "And for making you feel like you didn't belong here." Because everyone deserves to be treated with respect," he said through gritted teeth. Ren held him for another moment, letting the words sink in for everyone listening. Then, with the same fluid motion that had started this, she released his wrist and stepped back. Brixton stumbled, cradling his injured wrist against his chest. For a moment, Ren saw something that looked almost like relief in his eyes, as if being defeated was somehow easier than constantly having to prove his dominance. "If you ever touch me again," Ren said conversationally, "or if you hurt Dylan, or if you target anyone else the way you targeted me, I will make sure everyone on this campus understands exactly what kind of person you really are." She looked around at the crowd, making eye contact with faces that had watched her suffer for weeks without intervention. "That goes for all of you. The next time you see someone being hurt and you do nothing, remember this moment. Remember how it feels to watch someone fight back alone because no one else would." Tessa found her voice first. "You can't threaten us. We'll report you." Ren smiled, and it was the first genuine smile anyone at this school had ever seen from her. "Report me for what? Defending myself against assault? Please do. I'm sure the administration would love to see all the video evidence of what's been happening here. The color drained from Tessa's face as she realized the implications. Every cruel moment, every humiliation, every instance of harassment had been captured and shared by students who thought they were documenting someone else's pain for entertainment. Now that same evidence would show a clear pattern of bullying that had finally provoked a victim into defending herself. Brixton was still cradling his wrist, looking around at his crew and the crowd with dawning realization that the social dynamic he'd depended on had just shifted permanently. "This isn't over," he said, but the words sounded hollow even to him. "Yes," Wren replied calmly, "it is." She gathered her damaged books and soaked notes with unhurried precision, while the crowd slowly dispersed. Some students looked ashamed as they walked away, finally understanding their role in what had been happening. Others seemed excited by the drama, already planning how to share this new development. Dylan waited until they were alone before speaking. "Where did you learn to do that?" "My father," Wren said, slinging her backpack over her shoulder. "He said I'd know when it was time to use what he taught me." "That was incredible," Dylan said, genuine admiration in his voice. "I mean, I'm sorry it came to that, but watching you take control like that..." Wren looked at him carefully, searching for any sign of the pity she'd seen before. Instead, she found respect and something that might have been the beginning of deeper feelings. "I should have helped sooner," Dylan continued. "I should have done more than just tell them to stop. I'm sorry you had to handle that alone." "You tried," Wren said. "That's more than anyone else did." They walked together toward the psychology building, and Wren noticed how differently people looked at her now. Not through her or around her, but directly at her, with a new awareness of who she actually was. The change wasn't immediate or complete, but it was undeniable. Over the following weeks, Brixton's crew gave her a wide berth. The loud harassment stopped entirely, replaced by careful avoidance and occasional nervous glances when she passed them in the halls. Brixton himself seemed diminished somehow, his swagger replaced by a wariness that suggested he was still processing what had happened to him. Wren sometimes caught him rubbing his wrist absently, an unconscious reminder of the moment his worldview had been permanently altered. More importantly, other students began to treat her differently. The ones who had participated in her humiliation now avoided eye contact, but those who had simply been bystanders started offering tentative smiles. A few even approached her directly. "That was amazing what you did," a girl from her literature class said one afternoon. "I always wanted to say something when they were bothering you, but I didn't know how." Wren nodded, understanding. "Fear makes us all smaller than we really are." Dylan became a constant presence in her life, no longer just someone who was kind to her, but someone who genuinely seemed to see her value. They studied together, ate lunch together, and slowly Wren began to understand that she was worth defending, worth caring about, worth more than the crumbs of acceptance she'd been grateful to receive. 3 months after the confrontation, Wren was sitting in the same spot behind the library where Dylan had first joined her, but everything was different now. Her clothes were still second-hand, and her scholarship still barely covered her expenses, but she carried herself with quiet confidence that had nothing to do with her circumstances. Dylan found her there, as he often did, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the campus cafe. "Brixton transferred to state," he said, settling beside her on the bench. Wren accepted the coffee with a small smile. "I heard. Apparently his parents thought he needed a fresh start after what happened here. Tessa and Jace are keeping a pretty low profile these days too." "Good for them," Wren said, and meant it. She'd never wanted to destroy anyone, just to make them stop destroying her. Dylan studied her profile as she watched the autumn leaves falling. "Do you ever regret it? Fighting back like that?" Wren considered the question seriously. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret that so many people had to see someone's pain before they recognized it was wrong. But I don't regret standing up for myself. Your father would be proud, Dylan said softly. Tears pricked at Wren's eyes, but they were good tears this time. Yeah, she whispered. I think he would be. As the semester continued, Wren discovered something her father had never explicitly taught her. Standing up for yourself doesn't just change how others see you, it changes how you see yourself. She spoke up more in class, joined study groups, even volunteered to tutor struggling students in subjects where she excelled. The girl who had once apologized for existing now helped others find their own voices. She never forgot what it felt like to be powerless, and she made sure no one around her had to face their battles completely alone. The last time she saw Brixton was at the campus bookstore during finals week. He was there with his parents, loading up on school merchandise with the college logo. When he saw her approaching down the same aisle, he immediately stepped aside and avoided eye contact. But as Wren passed, she heard him say something quietly. I'm sorry. She turned to look at him, really look at him, and saw something she'd never noticed before. Behind the arrogance and cruelty, there was a scared person who had used power over others to feel powerful himself. It didn't excuse what he'd done, but it explained it. I know, she said simply, and continued down the aisle. The story wasn't about revenge, Wren realized as she graduated with honors 2 years later. It was about transformation. Not just her own, but everyone who had witnessed what happened when someone finally refused to accept being treated as less than human. Standing up for herself had taught her that strength wasn't something you used to dominate others. It was something you used to protect yourself and others from those who would. The difference between a victim and a bully wasn't the ability to cause harm. It was the choice of when and why and how much force was truly necessary. Wren Blackwater never forgot the lessons learned in that courtyard confrontation. But the most important lesson hadn't come from her father's training or her own courage. It had come from understanding that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is show others that fighting back doesn't require losing yourself in the process.